Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Wheeler Centre. I'm really pleased to introduce to you tonight Jay Bahadur, who is the author of Deadly Waters, The Hidden World of Somalia's Pirates. Jay is a freelance journalist from Canada, and he's written for the New York Times, the Times of London, and the Globe and Mail, amongst other publications. And he's also appeared on CNN, ABC, and the BBC, mostly talking about pirates. Is that right, Jay?
Exclusively.
Okay. So at the start of your book, I was struck by the fact that you were working in marketing, I believe, and you wanted to break into journalism. And so you asked yourself, on the one hand, there's journalism school, I could go to journalism school. And then on the other hand, I could throw myself into the middle of Somalia's pirate country and talk to pirates instead, having never been there before. So was there not a middle road that you thought you could run between?
Well, the thing was, it was just a great opportunity. I mean, I guess there would have been middle roads. I was sitting around sending pitches to editors. I guess that was the middle road, and not getting a response.
Okay.
So what I ended up doing was going to Somalia with the idea, well, I saw a few freelance articles. This is a topic that at the time no one was really into. There was no foreigners within the country. At worst, I'll sell a few articles. Who's not going to, buy an article about pirates? Everyone loves pirates.
Absolutely.
And then in the back of my mind, the book idea was there, but you don't really set out to write a book, when you haven't published anything else in your life.
Right.
But in the end, I ended up publishing a few freelance articles and then using those credentials as a way to get editors interested, and the book just kept evolving. Okay.
So, all right. So you decided to do that. You flew into Somalia on, was it an Antonov? You described it?
Yeah.
A shaky old Russian airplane.
Seats torn, seatbelts not working, and actually I just described it as Antonov is an old Soviet propeller plane, and there used to be very strong ties between Somalia and the Soviet Union. And then, of course, Soviet Union collapsed, Somalia collapsed, but the crew that's flying these planes are still these Russian or Ukrainian, just vodka-soaked pilots, and old wife beaters. And I just had this idea that these guys were, when these countries collapsed, they were just stuck in between and condemned ever to just ferry people back and forth between Djibouti and Somalia.
Right. Do they speak English to you, at least?
No.
Okay.
Really. I think you need a few words of English to be able to land a plane in various countries, but
that was it. So, all right, so you land in Somalia, and the very first thing you have to do is hire 2 guards with AK-47s, I believe, and what is the city that you land in?
Well, I didn't hire them. I want to make it clear that I just didn't fly into Somalia on my own, because that would have been a recipe for kidnapping.
So how did you set up your guards?
Well, I was working actually with a local journalist named Mohammed Farole.
Okay.
And he was very eager immediately, this idea of writing a book. I think he just assumed from the get-go that I had already got a book contract or something like that, even though he never said that. And so we started talking, and then when I decided to go, actually about a week before I arrived in Somalia for the first time, this was in January 2009, his father, Abdurrahman Farole, who maybe some of you have heard of, actually is an adopted Melbourne resident who has a PhD from La Trobe. Actually, his PhD is in conflict, I believe, building institutions in collapsed states.
We're definitely going to get to him later.
It's certainly a topic that was very relevant in the case of his present job. And so he was elected president of Puntland, the region that I ended up going to, like I said, about a week before. And so they handled all the security, and they got these UN-trained guards to basically pace themselves onto me 24/7. And
Was that frightening?
Well, I mean, I think after a few days, when nothing had happened to me, I thought to myself, do I really need these guys? Right. But that was a kind of foolish thing to think, because I did end up having in one scrape with the pirate gang, and there was certainly, the absence of them would have put me in serious danger, for sure. Right.
And another thing that struck me just at the very start, as you're entering the country, is that you noticed something a little funny about the currency.
Oh, well, immediately.
It's photocopied, I believe. How does that work?
I actually have some in my bag. I can show you some after. But Yeah, essentially. Well, I mean, for large transactions, they use American
Right.
money, but for small things, they basically use these bundles of 1,000 shilling notes. This was the former currency of the Somali Republic.
Okay.
1,000 is the largest denomination. It's all the one that all that's used now. But yeah, there's such a problem with hyperinflation in the country that they just look like they've been printed by a cheap photocopier, and with this glaring new orange ink, it still proclaims Mogadishu 1991 on them. And actually, it's hyperinflation was, as I discussed in the book, was sort of one of the problems that may have contributed to piracy, just the
Okay.
degrading economic situation in 2007, 2008.
Okay. So, well, let's get into piracy then, because you have such an incredible amount of detail in your book, and it's just so rich in terms of explaining what's been going on with piracy, which seems in some ways like it's been with us forever, but in its modern form, as Jay explains, has really only become a major problem since 2007. So from that very recent date, it has caught the attention of the world in many different ways, and I was wondering if you could just walk us through an act of piracy and tell us what happens from the start. What does it look like? How do they approach the boat? What happens on the boat when the pirates get on the boat? You mentioned a number of... There are different kinds of ships, and they are completely different. There are super tankers that are full of oil, there are fishing trawlers, and there are private yachts, which seem an especially terrifying kind of situation. So can you just tell us, what does it look like when someone
Sure.
hijacks a ship?
So, yeah, you mentioned that there are different types of ships that are hijacked, but I should state right out that the pirates aren't looking for one ship or another. Essentially, it's get out there, float, and take anything that comes along.
Yeah.
And what's happened is over the years, the kind of pirate gangs have become more sophisticated. So early on, the characters in my book, who were all former fishermen, again, we can probably discuss that later, had they're just their fishing skiffs that they used for the course of their.
How big are they?
Be 3-4 meters, and then maybe they might have a 45 horsepower engine, some outboard motor, and yeah, these guys, early pirates, would have a range of a couple hundred kilometers into the ocean. Okay. Then what happened is they started getting more sophisticated. They started using just larger fishing vessels, Yemeni dhows. Often, a lot of the time, they just before going out and heading out deep into the ocean, they'd hijack Yemeni fishermen, and then God knows what happens to the fishermen. But these sort of attacks generally aren't reported. And with these vessels, they would allow them to set off hundreds of miles into the ocean. And they would always take, along with these vessels, they would take, again, 2 skiffs. And so it would sort of be like old American whalers, where they had their mothership.
Okay.
And they'd go out, find, the whaling routes. In this case, make your way to the international shipping lanes.
Right.
And then when you sight your prey, the entire crew, this would be about ranging between 7 and 15 men, would deploy into these 2 skiffs and head out after it. You would swarm from essentially one would hang back while the other approached and use rope ladders, essentially rope ladders with grappling hooks, sort of like a Batman type device, or a flimsy aluminum ladder to climb up the side of the ship, and the other one would hang back just to provide covering fire. Very simple military tactic.
Okay.
And pretty much the crew always surrenders. They generally have a window of about 25 to 40 minutes, to maybe 20 to 40 minutes to warning from sighting the pirates to being boarded. And they'll do things like set evasive maneuvers. So, for example, zigzagging in an attempt to
that really works.
Well, one ship actually defended itself by setting itself into continual loop that essentially created a wake large enough that the pirates couldn't approach. So that's sort of an unusual defense. Sometimes crews have done such things as pouring sawdust on them. One Chinese crew had been prepared. A fishing crew had been prepared for such an eventuality and unleashed an assault with beer bottles and Molotov cocktails and hoses.
Empty or full beer bottles?
I think they were empty.
Okay.
I think they didn't waste full beer bottles on pirates. But I mean, that was a case where this Chinese crew probably knew that if they got on board, God knows what was going to happen to them. Their lives wouldn't have the same value as, say, a Western crew to the pirates.
Why is that? Because no one would pay the ransom?
Well, it'd be a fishing ship, so
Okay.
their parent company would be a lot more likely just to wash their hands of them, and whereas established Western shipping company couldn't do that. But yeah, most of the time, I mean, shipping companies instruct their crews to just surrender, don't put up any resistance.
Right.
Sometimes the ships will have defensive mechanisms like barbed wire, high-powered water hoses in place to deter boarding, electric fences sometimes.
Right.
But the crew is instructed not to resist.
Why is that? I mean, it seems that it takes place out where no one else is looking. Why can't they pull out guns? Now, obviously it would be illegal, but why doesn't that happen more, that people take the law into their own hands out on the high seas?
Well, it wouldn't be illegal. There's no law against carrying guns on the high seas. Sure. The problem is, you'd have to register all your weapons with whatever countries you were making port in, right? So that would be a problem. It would be a bureaucratic nightmare. But more to the point is that shipping companies, this was actually an active debate in the shipping community, and they decided more or less that it's not worth escalating an incident. For one, you'd have to put your crews through essentially crack mercenary training. You probably have to pay them at least double. And often these are crews that don't always work together, right? They're just often many different nationalities, 3 or 4 different nationalities who very, very well might not speak each other's languages. So it's essentially not the best circumstance, not the best combination for a mercenary team when they can't even understand each other.
Right.
But more to the point is that they want to avoid an incident. I mean, pirates will carry heavier weapons than you'd be you'd feel comfortable arming unskilled mariners with. Rocket-propelled grenades, heavy Soviet machine guns, that kind of thing.
Have they used those rocket-propelled grenades on the ships as they approach them?
They've actually they've blown holes in the sides of chemical tankers with them. And, I mean, it's very difficult to actually, most ships these days are double-hulled after kind of the Exxon Valdez really started pushing that safety requirement on every ship.
Right.
So it's next to impossible for, I would say, an RPG to blow a hole in a double hull and actually ignite, say, a chemical or oil tanker. But if they got into the engine room, it's a different story. And if you have a running firefight going on, it's just who knows what's going to happen. And even if the ship isn't blown up, I mean, you could have a lot of human damages, and which would not only be bad press for the shipping companies, but they would obviously have to pay damages to the families of the crews. I mean, it gets very expensive.
Right. Okay. So passive resistance is the basic idea, and then so once the pirates actually get on the ship, then what happens? Because it seems much more complicated having read your book, and it seems to potentially be drawn out for a very, very long time. You actually saw some ships in in various bays while you were there that were actually hijacked at the time. That's right.
Right. So essentially, the pirates themselves have no idea how to navigate. They will essentially, I mean, like I said, it's a simple matter of pointing yourself in the right direction, floating, and waiting. So they're not
the hijacked ship.
Right.
Or you mean
when they're actually heading out to the mission. So when they actually capture a ship, they still require the crew to operate it.
Right.
And so they'll give them coordinates and say go here.
Okay.
And they take the crew to a port inhabited by people they know, their own clan, really, because everything in Somalia is done through clans. So pirates who come from a certain area will generally take the ship there to be held, and they bring guards on board. So again, these are usually just friends or relatives of those already involved in the hijacking, who are brought on just to watch over the hostages. The attackers will often just go on shore and get advances of their money and start partying immediately. They don't want to be sitting on there for months.
Okay.
So they bring will do a favor for a friend or their brother or whatever, and let him become a guard. So these guards then will spend. There may be 20, 30, 40 of these or more. will spend the entire period of the captivity on the ship. They'll bring cooks on board, a cook for the crew sometimes, a cook for the pirates. One pirate group that I was investigating, the pirates never touched the crew's food because they were afraid they were going to poison them. So
they thought the crew would poison them.
Yeah, they thought the crew would poison them. So
that's actually not a bad idea. Has anyone tried that?
You'd have to get all of them, I assume.
Yeah, right.
And yeah, so this and captivity periods used to be. Oh, they'll also bring on, of course, a translator and a negotiator who will call up the shipping company, who will pass them on to their insurer or their crisis response team. And captivity periods used to be, a couple months, and now they've gone on. Now it's more like 7-8 months is the average captivity period, because the negotiators are getting more savvy, and the ransoms are going up. It's getting to be a much more high stakes game. And now I think there's a ship. The name escapes me right now, but there's a ship with some just really poor souls on board who've now been held for well over a year. And they've sort of been somewhat abandoned by their shipping company. So, yeah, it's getting a lot more harrowing.
Yeah, one of the reasons why I guess the piracy sort of has the effect it does that you described, and I was so amazed by, was that the shipping companies. One of these simple reasons is they just don't have enough crew. That the shipping companies have been pruning the crew on these massive tankers. So what were the numbers you described? They used to be, is it somewhere around 50, and now it's...
No, I'd say for a large container ship, you might have in the 70s had a crew of something like 25. Now you have to have a crew of 11, 12, 15. And I think this is a product of generally the whole shipping industry is becoming more and more cutthroat cost-wise. This may be a product of globalization. I don't really know, but essentially what you have now is not only are there the crews are now pretty much exclusively made up of people from the developing world. I mean, I think about half of all crew members ever captured by Somali pirates have been Filipinos. Half.
Okay.
And it's so these like I said, you're also running on undermanned crews, and one very practical effect of this is that fatigue is a huge problem.
Right.
You only have one officer of the watch usually on deck at any time, and you simply don't see the pirates coming. And I mentioned that there was a window of, say, 20 to 40 minutes that you have. Yeah. You really want to be on the 40-minute side of that if you're going to avoid a boarding. And what happens is that if you show early on, if you show the pirates that you see them coming, engage in evasive maneuvers, whatnot, they'll often just drop the chase right there if they've been spotted early. It's very opportunistic, and they'll just wait for an easier ship to come along. So actually, the number one measure to take to avoid being hijacked is simply having more watches on deck.
Right. So for a lot of these people who are victims of this, basically what's happening is they're waking up and the ship has been taken over. Is that more or less what's happening? They're not paying attention somehow, and all of a sudden they're surrounded by pirates.
Well, I don't know if not paying attention is really it, but if there's only one set of eyes on deck, and that's why ships with fewer crew members tend to be hijacked more frequently.
Right.
But I'm not saying they're all sleeping on the job or anything. I'm just saying it's just too much for. Mariners I talk to all complain that they're really overworked and fatigued. And
there's clearly not enough people. So is it essentially cheaper for the shipping companies to put these ships out with these skeleton crews and risk $1 million ransom than it is to staff them?
It must be. I mean, if they're doing it must be. And insurance insurance prices have shot up, but so that's a much higher cost. But also, it still remains that very few ships actually are hijacked going through there. It's something still like 0.2, 0.3% of ships moving through the Gulf of Aden, Suez Canal, actually get hijacked. So it's still a cost of doing business. And I assume if they're not hijacking or they're not hiring more crew, they have done their own economic analysis of it. But.
Yeah. So it's happening in the Gulf of Aden, and that's because why is it all there?
Well, the Gulf of Aden is pretty much the gateway to the Suez Canal, and is home to about 10% of global shipping every year. So it's about roughly 20,000 vessels transiting through that area every year. And now, I mean, they're pushing so far into the Indian Ocean now that some of the ships they're hijacking aren't even necessarily going into the Suez Canal. I mean, they've actually pushed up into the Straits of Hormuz, which is the gateway to the Persian Gulf. So they're pushing up near Iran now, and they're pushing certainly as far south as the Seychelles and Madagascar, and they're hijacking yachts out of the Seychelles, who are certainly not headed through the Gulf of Aden. So they've certainly expanded their scope in the last couple of years. Right.
So I think, correct me, please, but the last time the world had a lot of pirates was around, is it the 1600s? The 1700s? It was a long time ago.
Well, I guess it would be mostly, I think, the 1700s was the glory age of buccaneering. Okay. But I mean, you've had pirates in the Malacca Straits and so on in more recent times. There's a big problem shared by Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia. But those were more pirates, like more bandits than pirates. I mean, they'd come on, and it wasn't about kidnapping. It was just about, just stealing laptops and jewelry and getting off, that kind of thing.
So well, then, why is this happening now? Why has this gone from this relatively localized phenomenon to this international problem that countries everywhere are trying to grapple with?
Well, I mean, a lot of people ask me, well, is it about poverty? And I say, well, I guess that's a background factor, obviously, but if it's about poverty, why didn't this happen immediately as soon as it could, as soon as the state collapsed in 1991? And the answer to that, I think, is that the security situation wasn't right. And also, the business model really wasn't established. So what happened is in 2005, I spoke earlier about how the characters in my book are fishermen. So during the early 90s, a lot of local fishermen started suffering from foreign fishing ships coming in, often entering into contracts with local warlords who posted guards in their decks. These ships would come and shoot the local fishermen, run over their gear. I heard one story from the local people where actually a group of fishermen, one fisherman, had been swept up in a net and drowned. They destroyed a lot of the local fishing habitats as well through drag fishing. And so these fishermen vigilantes started lashing out. But they, again, were not so much this kidnapping at sea model. That actually took a while to develop, and it wasn't until 2005 that a former civil servant who was just a businessman who had escaped Somalia came back and just decided, well, hold on, I can actually start... we equip better crews that can go out farther, and it's the crew that's important. It's not necessarily the cargo of the ship or the ship itself, although that's obviously a relevant factor. And what a lot of people don't know is that Somali pirates justify themselves by saying we're only doing this because of foreign encroachment, foreign fishing in our waters. But what most people don't know is that Afwene, this former civil servant, his gangs began by attacking World Food Program transports, bringing food into Mogadishu. And this continued until actually France started escorting the shipments to port. And still to this day, the EU reserves one warship to escort WFP vessels into southern Somalia. So why exactly it took till 2007, 2008 to really explode, I believe, and this is the sort of central thesis of the book, I guess you could say, is that Puntland, which is the region, again, I was in northeastern Somalia. So if you imagine the Horn, it's just it's basically the end of the Horn, the bit of the Horn that juts into the Gulf of Aden and Indian Ocean. So geographically, it was perfect. You look at a map and you see, well, they're right sitting at the entrance to this gateway. And then also, I mentioned a bit earlier that hyperinflation was one of the problems that may have led to the timing for the outbreak of piracy. But more pertinent than that was that the Puntland government then, in early 2008, completely ran out of money to pay its security forces. And a lot of men who were just sitting around with guns realized that they had other options. And these early fishermen who were experienced went up and down the coast training some of these willing recruits. And there are other factors, like as well. There was a Coast Guard, several Coast Guarding experiments in Puntland that collapsed, and when private security firms who were training the men then left the country. Again,
but they
these
left the trained men,
right? And they had been trained. They had been trained in how to use weapons,
right.
How to conduct boarding and seizure operations, and how to navigate. And I mean, these
all the essential skills,
right?
Okay.
And there's very strong evidence that early on, members of the former Coast Guard were present among early pirate boarding parties.
Right.
And so these factors, I think, but it was mainly the collapse of the Puntland government in 2008, which really, I think, precipitated this immediate burst of piracy. And Puntland at that time really had the perfect mix of security and insecurity, because there was still a government, it was still kind of functioning, it was keeping out the Islamists and the rabble and the warlords and that sort of thing that goes on in the south. But so, like any businessman, the pirates had a stable environment in which to operate.
Right.
But at the same time, the government had no way of controlling the coastal areas.
Right.
So it was a kind of the best of both worlds, a perfect environment.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you just described the pirates as businessmen, and that's another thing that struck me very much as I read your book. And you, in fact, talk about the freakonomics of piracy, and there are so many characters in this business organization, and there are so many roles to play as regards the money. So you know, what is the freakonomics of piracy? Where is that money coming from? And who's getting the $9.5 million? That was it the Samho dream?
There was actually a more recent one that was actually for $13.5 million. So that was the old.
That's the highest.
That's the former high water mark. And, but yeah, and earlier this year there was a $13.5 million ransom paid.
Right. So where is that money?
You mentioned like the freakonomics. I actually have a title in the book, a chapter in the book titled "The Freakonomics of Piracy," because as I was delving into the economics of one pirate gang, I realized it was very similar to a chapter in the book Freakonomics, where they detail the authors go and detail the workings of an inner city Chicago crack gang. And the point that they were trying to make there is that everyone has this idea of this glamorized wealth of the drug trade.
Lots of money.
Yeah, the money flowing through, champagne parties, women, everything. But that's only true for a very few number of people. And in Freakonomics, what they found out is that the street dealers actually made about $3 an hour, $3.30, I think. And when I started looking at the lower downs in the pirate group, so this one gang it was a small gang, the one that I was researching, because it was actually a ship that was being held when I was in Somalia, and I had met members of the gang, and I started prying into their finances. And so it was a small gang of about 35. But even in this gang, about 20 of these men were these guards who were brought on, like I said, just to make a little extra money. And the ransom that was paid was $1.8 million in the end. So still early on, it was a smallish ransom compared to what you see now.
Right.
But the guards made only $12,000 each, which worked out to about $10 an hour. One of the cooks didn't make much more than $5 an hour. And even though seems like a lot of money for, especially for Somali, they still spent over 2 months of their lives on board, and then would have their friends and family and so on waiting to suck them dry as soon as they came on shore, and they're expected to share the money. Right. And for most of these young guys, it only lasts for a few weeks or a month. And another thing, which I talk about in the book, and again in the Freakonomics chapter, is that as they often start spending on credit before they've even received the ransom.
When they're planning.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, the chances of a ransom being paid are pretty much 100%. And so people on land are willing to extend credit.
Right.
But they charge 100%. So they have to pay back double anything they buy. So even the attacking team, who might in this case made about $40,000 plus each, if they want a car, secondhand car, might cost maybe $15,000. If they want it immediately, which they do, because it's all about getting the immediate status, getting on board, finding women, and so on. They have to pay double. Okay. And pretty soon, if you spend $30,000 out of your $40,000 on a car, and you're chewing this drug that they chew, khat, which I think you want to talk about later. Just this narcotic drug they chew. It costs $20 for about a daily dose.
Yeah, well, let's talk about the khat,
sure.
because that connects straight up to the money, right? Because that seems to be where most of the money actually goes. And I mean, it's a traditional drug of choice in the area, is that right? But it's becoming much more widespread.
It's been chewed for centuries. I mean, some of these early African explorers, white explorers, just commented on how, especially holy men would spend just days and days chewing this. Would help their studies because it'd keep them all jacked up. And
I think you tried khat while you were there.
Well, this is what I found is that, I mean, it was really.
Did you feel holy with it?
I didn't. I just felt sick.
Really?
It was, I describe it as just imagine any sort of plant you see. Imagine what it would taste to chew a random
just
plant.
Chewing a leaf.
And that's what it tastes like. It's just bitter filth. It was a way to the pirates' hearts, really, and this is something I use as an interviewing tool because it made them, not only was I, did they think I was cool and whatnot, but it made them very relaxed and talkative. It's sort of like coffee or coca leaf or a betel nut, that kind of thing, and or either that or as I was, being prepared to chew khat myself, people told me it would either make me relaxed and talkative or a sex-crazed maniac, essentially.
And how did that go?
Well, I was relaxed. But apparently, the pirates were asking me when we were chewing it, they're like, do you want a woman? Do you want a woman? Why are you so relaxed? Why? And the funny thing was, some of their few experiences with white people were through porn movies, and so they asked me, why are you not more horny? All the white men we see are so horny.
Really.
And this is a direct quote.
Raised the class levels of white men in Somalia.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well done. So most of the money goes on the khat, and it seems like what was once perhaps a traditional, that there was a role for it, but that it's becoming more problematic, that it is. Everyone seems to chew it all the time. You even described, I think it was in Kenya, government ministers just chew it all day long.
Yeah, Yemen, it's an even bigger problem. And Yemen, I think even Yemeni men take their wives and children on khat picnics, which Somali men would be too ashamed to do at this point. But essentially it's becoming a huge, huge social problem. And essentially, when this stuff is flown in from Kenya and Ethiopia every day, it gets to Gutaway. I forgot to mention, this was the city that I was most based in, the capital of Puntland. And it arrives, there's actually no airport there, so it arrives from southern airports, it rolls in at about 12, and the whole city just bursts alive. The soldiers, the transports come streaming in, these old beaten up station wagons, and old trucks. The soldiers will take attacks of it as it comes in. They'll fill up their arms, and then it goes and are offloaded into the cars of merchants, who are all women. It's only women that inhabit the khat market. And then as these transports go into town, they're just mobbed. People try to steal off the back. It falls off. Children, especially in the poorer neighborhoods, it's just really sad. You see children jostling just to pick a few leaves off the ground.
For themselves, or so they can make some money?
Well, I mean, a few leaves you wouldn't be able to sell for more than a couple cents. Even the goats are addicted. The goats go running after it. When they hear the station wagon toots, they go after them. It's pretty. It's like a whole city that's addicted, and it's not just in. I mean, it's worse in the big cities, but I mean, everywhere people chew khat when they can. It's really, if Somalia ever is to move into the modern world, it's not something that can be sustained. Right.
So is that where most of the money is going? It's flowing out of the country to these growers or dealers.
I honestly think most of the money is spent on cars and khat. And like you say, it immediately sends the money back into international markets. So because the cars come from Dubai generally, so you don't really see any sustained rise in living and in the standard of living. And this is how most of the pirate henchmen, I guess, like I said, spend it. The financiers and so on are more businessmen, and they take half of the money, and so some of their money will obviously be invested in property, and they'll take it outside the country if they can, and so on. But I think for the average Somali pirate, most of it is just very instant gratification, and it disappears very quickly. Right. And
so the networks that the khat disappears along and the money disappears along, you talk about these incredible clan obligations and this conflict and contrast between these very old clan family lineages and a central state. So how does that work? They seem to be in conflict quite a lot.
Yeah, they are, and I think clan is essentially why Somalia fell apart in the first place. I mean, you had a dictator who was very much dispensing, who tried to eliminate the idea of clan in Somalia. He outlawed. It was very common pre-Somali independence. So
but
in the 1960s.
That's how they've always done it.
Right. So
right?
it's a very old nomadic society, and similar to the Bedouin, they've adopted very strict forms of groups and who belongs and who doesn't in segregated along clan lines. And so previous to the rise of the modern state, it was very common for Somalis to ask one another when they met, Ya Tehe, which means literally like, who are you? What clan are you?
Okay.
And Siad Barre, the former dictator, Mohammed Siad Barre, actually outlawed the question. So he was very aware that clan was something that undercut the central power of the state. But I mean, how often does it work to outlaw a question? Like, let's, look and...
Was he a clan member himself?
Well, I mean, everyone belongs to a clan.
Did he insult his own clan by doing that?
Well, the thing is, he ostensibly wanted to eliminate clan from Somali society. But he himself, I mean, relied extensively just on his own... his clan was called the Marahan, and he relied on them. I mean, he dispensed all government patronage, jobs, and so on through his own clan members. So he was caught between a rock and a hard place in that everyone could see the hypocrisy of what he was doing. And eventually what happened after, disastrous economic policies and his failed wars, again, he was going to war to try and distract people from their internal divisions of the country. Basically, rebel groups formed along clan lines and ousted him. And what you have now today is just protracted inter-clan conflict in Somalia. They never really got over it. And in Puntland itself, Puntland now is essentially a state inhabited by one of Somalia's 4 clan families. But within that clan family, there are different branches that essentially pay no heed to the Puntland government.
So they fight within the clans Puntland, as well as...
Yeah, of course, within Puntland, within this clan family, several of these branches have declared their own mini-states within mini-state.
Okay.
So some of them have seceded to Somaliland, which is itself an independent territory to the east, to the west. So Puntland, is by no means, even though it has a semi-functioning government. I mean, the president can't go into certain areas. It's like walking, in the wrong neighborhood at night. He himself can't go into certain areas, or he'd be attacked. Or, it'd be very well, that may be a bit of hyperbole, but it'd be very dangerous for him.
Right.
And it's not at all like the dynamics of a central state.
Right.
And of course, for piracy, that has implications because. Out of each territory, you have sub-clans operating, different sub-clans. And if you're the central government, you simply can't walk into a territory with your so-called official state military, because it would be viewed in Somalia as one clan attacking another. It wouldn't be seen as law and order. It'd be seen as launching a clan war.
Okay.
So there was a story early where in 2008, just when Somali piracy was kicking off, the then president, former president Mahmoud Hirsi, said, "Okay, I need to do something about Ale, which was the then pirate capital." But he couldn't do it himself because he was not a member of that subclan. So he made up this position, deputy police commander, and appointed an Isi Mahmoud a member who was the same clan as that town.
Okay.
Sent him with a force of 60 or so soldiers to the town, and they ran into about 150 pirates, armed as well as they were. And so what happened is this man, Haji, he simply sent a negotiator to the pirates. They said, "How much money do you want?" And they sent him back with a bag full of $20,000. Haji took it and he quit, left his esteemed post. So that was the one attempt of the former Puntland government to address piracy.
Right.
And I think you see not only are the pirates, when they're in mass, quite a formidable fighting force themselves, but it's very hard to enforce law and order without just creating a bloodbath or igniting a clan war.
Well, let's talk about the current government of Puntland, because the president of Puntland is an ex-Melburnian. He was an academic at La Trobe University. and his name is Farole, is that correct?
Abdirahman Farole, yeah.
Right, so he's gone from Latrobe to driving I think you described as a gold four-wheel drive around, bulletproof four-wheel drive with crowds ululating as he pulls into towns. So that's quite a shift. What's he like? Did you like him? How effective is he as a president?
Yeah, he's only the I think he's the second civilian leader in Somalia since the last democratically elected president was overthrown in 1969, and so he's an academic. He's a very soft-spoken man. Came to power very much on an anti-pirate platform. But the problem was, again, in clan politics in Somalia, I certainly benefited from this because he was the same subclan as a lot of these early pirates.
Of the pirates.
Boya, who's a character in my book and is considered sort of the godfather of piracy in Puntland, grew up in the same town as him, Ale, as I was just talking about. And so there's very credible allegations that Frole accepted pirate money in the run-up to the 2009 election. These allegations are actually made by the UN, by the UN monitoring group on Somalia, and I think it's probably credible.
So he was running on an anti-pirate platform, but he took the pirate money, and presumably that was to soften the anti-pirate stance. I mean, what? Well,
maybe it's a matter of I need to get elected first, and then I'll carry on my promises. So anything to get elected. But I think this illustrates some problems we might have with understanding, so-called corruption in Somalia. That wouldn't be considered corruption. I mean, they were basically his relatives, and he was accepting a token of respect, basically, from these pirates,
which he's obliged to do.
Well, presumably? I mean, basically, what I'm trying to say is, I'm not trying to say that it's not hypocritical or anything like that. I'm just saying it would be seen in Somalia in a different light as just the exchange of money between relatives, almost, rather than corruption, rather than a gift made to a state official in order to affect the governance process in any way. So it's not seen in those official terms, I guess, it's very. I think it's difficult to apply the concept of corruption a little bit, but again, not saying it's not hypocritical. But in any case,
I think time with Farole.
I did.
Right?
I spent. I had lunch with him many times. I shared his table, and I found him he was a very scholarly man. Obviously, I think he speaks about 4 or 5 different languages fluently. And I think he truly is committed, especially now, to cracking down on piracy, and he has. In Puntland, he's been very effective. He's cleaned, again, because he is the same subclan as those in Ale. He's been much more effective at addressing it, and Ale is no longer a pirate base. He's tried to bring in an anti-piracy task force that was actually was going to be funded by United Arab Emirates money, and was quashed by the United Nations, actually. We can discuss that later again. But he has taken very positive steps and has really committed himself to rebuilding Puntland's international reputation, and I really think that for him and for the Puntland government at large, it's more profitable to be an aid recipient than take whatever small handouts you can get from pirates, really.
Right. Well, you mentioned the pirate Boya, who is this fascinating character, and in a very novelistic way in your book goes through these series of enormous life changes. So he starts out a fisherman, and we find out right at the end of the book that there's a kind of a sad twist at the end. But can you talk us through a little bit of Boya's life?
Well, Boya, again, is he became very quickly. He was the first pirate I was taken to meet, who was completely disdainful of me when I first met him. Barely looked at me, shook my hand just very limply. Even though he was quite an imposing man himself, he was about 6'7", incredibly gaunt. And actually, I was taken to meet him in an open field because my partner was terrified. He had tuberculosis. He was so sort of emaciated. And so Boya was, again, considered kind of a founding figure in Puntland. He claimed in 1995 by attacking Korean illegal fishing ships in his territory. And in 2009, when I began to speak to him, he had he was giving up the gangster life, really. He was going through this redemption.
He was renouncing.
Yeah, he had claimed to have
apart.
found religion, really, and found Muhammad, I guess you could say, and was renouncing this life, and was actually going around to other pirates or would-be pirates and convincing them to swear off piracy. And he was taking them to the mosque and literally making them,
So he was
say,
evangelizing.
I will not go into the sea as a pirate on the Quran, making them swear. And then I discovered later, and at the same time, he was actually, I told you that some former Coast Guards had become pirates. He was then, with his former colleagues, again, most of them ex-fishermen, was himself trying to form a new Coast Guard. He wanted to become a Coast Guard.
Right, to
so
arrest
there's
pirates.
Just right, and he told me one meeting, I said, well, who's going to believe you, boy? You're a pirate. Why would anyone believe that you're going to be a Coast Guard? And he said, no, you can't teach us anything about fighting pirates. No one can tell us anything about hijacking ships. So he was very convinced that he was the man for the job. I guess like a former bank robber teaches, bank officials about security or whatnot. So he thought he was the ideal man for the job. President Frole didn't think so. So he never was given that job. I think it would have been pretty bad for Puntland PR if you had an ex-pirate brigade roaming the seas again, officially. But by the time, I don't want to give away what happens in the book, but let's just say Boya has more... has some problems escaping his former life.
He does. But you met with him a number of times, and I mean, it seems like you liked him. You had some very personable, I don't know if that's the right word, chats with this guy. You relaxed and talked for many hours by the sounds of it.
Yeah, he definitely warmed up to me and started, after when I went back to Somalia the second time, I gave him a Toronto Blue Jays baseball T-shirt as a kind of thank you gift, and he wore it for the next 3 days, and after that we were good. So he would he even hugged me goodbye and everything, I did like him, but I think I don't want to sort of glorify piracy or anything, but I really do draw a divide between him and his men and these people who had this original justification for their actions, and the kind of cynical gangsters who are out there who have never set foot, within sight of a fishing boat, and are just claiming, as like they're all doing this because of foreign fishing, because of the rape of Somalia's resources and so on. And are not attacking fishing ships, are going 1,000 miles into the ocean, and now have begun increasingly murdering people. So
you had an encounter with some of those guys, by the sound of it. You were in a fishing town, and you actually asked if you could go on board the ship, which would have been an amazing insight had you got on there. But what was the reaction from those pirates when you asked if you could go and have a look around?
Well, I was chatting with the logistics officer, so he was the member of the group responsible for supplying the food and so on to the captured ship, and he was joking that the hostages were fat and happy and were happier on there than they were back home, which was the Ukraine.
Because generally they do feed them and look after them. That's the main rule. Is that right?
They do generally treat them pretty well, but compared to other hostage takers. But it's still, there's been many cases of illness and death among hostages but just through stress and illness. A couple of had heart attacks. And in any case, they were kind of joking, being very facetious about it. And when I asked to get on board the ship, this guy immediately ran out and brought the rest of the gang, who got their guns, and kind of got us to leave the village very quickly. And then I later learned that there was actually one of the crew members had been shot and killed during the boarding, accidentally, but still killed, and another had been was wounded and was actually probably in the ship's medical facility or whatnot at the time, and they were just kind of joking about how happy they were, and so it struck me that these are some pretty bad dudes.
That's right. So they weren't very happy when you asked them afterwards.
Not at all. And they were concealing this information from the shipping companies because they didn't. It would obviously hurt their credibility and their ransom negotiating position. So.
And again, just thinking where you started at the start of the book, so you've bypassed journalism school, gone straight to Somalia, done all this amazing research, and one of the things you've done since is you've ended up advising the US State Department, is that right?
It was, for one
So they
meeting
wanted
at least.
What did they want? What did they want to find out from you?
They just want to know what's going on in Somalia, and I've realized that U.S. intelligence out of Somalia is just not good. Even now, I mean, and I think you saw this in 2006 was the really big kind of indicator of this, when Ethiopia actually invaded Somalia, backed by U.S. Support, and they totally didn't see what was coming, which was a complete radicalization of the population, and the launching of Al-Shabaab, which is the terrorist organization operating in Somalia now. And they totally misread the situation, and things are a lot worse than they were 5 years ago in Somalia. And of course, this horrific famine that's happening now, is due in part to what Shabaab has been doing in terms of keeping people from fleeing and receiving aid, and also themselves terrorizing farmers, just terrible things. And so they kind of just wanted to know what was happening, and I found, like, in general, that they really had no idea. And I went in there planning to be kind of ambushed with some sort of CIA reports that were contradicting whatever I was saying, but it wasn't like that at all.
But they just wanted to see what you saw.
Yeah, the CIA and so on is very active in Somalia, and so is JSOC, like the military, the Special Forces Joint Council, but they're very much focused on terrorism, not piracy. So
right. So, were there any questions? Have we covered most of it? I think there's someone at the back.
Hi there. I was wondering, I guess, whether or not I heard you mention before that it was more profitable being a donee essentially than it was taking a small cut from the pirates. Does that then present that same sort of set of problems that you have in a place like Afghanistan, where you see a sort of schism between say poppy growing and what militaries are trying to do and aid programs are trying to do?
Well, I think in Afghanistan, at least you have the option of replacing poppy crops with some other sort of cash crop, whereas there's nothing really to replace piracy, unfortunately. This is why I think that I kind of go into solutions. We didn't really discuss solutions, but in the epilogue, I discuss a very basic plan that to help mitigate piracy, and it all focuses on law enforcement and security versus things like economic development, because I really don't think economic development in Somalia is first of all it's a very long-term project, obviously, and if solving the problem of piracy needs to be something much more short to medium term. But the problem is there really isn't that much, as long as Somalia stays in the current state it's in, there just won't be the opportunity to say, provide alternative jobs for pirates when, the jobs they can get there. And even, say, a job in the Puntland security forces would pay about $30 a month. And even though the lower down guys I mentioned were making about $10, they were making $10 an hour. So, it's very hard to provide alternative employment that's attractive at all. I was just saying, from the point of view of the Puntland government, they would want very much to re-engage with the international community, just because, like I said, it's they might be getting a few millions in handouts from pirates a year if they were, engaged in corruption, this sort of corruption, whereas you potentially have tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars in aid that could come into Puntland if it was trusted as a partner.
Were there any other questions? Well, Jay, this is an incredible journey, and thank you very much for sharing it with us tonight. Let's all give Jay a big round of applause.